Have you ever wondered why every culture has monsters? Not just myths or bedtime stories, but creatures specifically designed to haunt the edge of human imagination. Too strange to be real. Too familiar to ignore. We say they're metaphors. We say they're fiction. But the truth is, monsters were never just monsters. They were warnings, symbols, tools. In ancient times, monsters showed us where the world ended. They kept us away from cliffs, dark woods, and dangerous questions. In modern times, they still do, just in different costumes. We don't summon demons anymore. We just invent new ones, and believe in them just as deeply. This video is not about horror. It's about control, about how societies use fear to create order, and how mythology, philosophy, and dark psychology all work together to build monsters we think are protecting us, when they're really just keeping us quiet. You'll see how gods used beasts to guard their power, how thinkers used fear to explain why people obey, and how modern institutions, from media to government to religion, learned that monsters don't have to exist to be useful, because nothing makes people easier to control than believing something out there is hunting them. Something worse than chaos. Something worse than the truth. So tonight, we'll go slowly. No panic, no rush. Just quiet reflection. Let's look at the monsters, what they meant, who created them, and what they've been hiding from us all along. You're listening to Slowburn Mind. This is why humans need monsters. Every civilization has birthed its own monsters. But these weren't just creatures to defeat. They were blueprints of terror. They reflected the fears people couldn't name, the instincts they couldn't trust, and the parts of themselves they weren't allowed to speak aloud. In myth, the monster doesn't just threaten the hero. It reveals him, and us. Let's begin in ancient Greece. A culture obsessed with perfection, symmetry, and reason. And yet, filled with monsters, twisted, grotesque, primal beings. Medusa, Typhon, the Chimera. Why did a civilization so proud of its logic need so many nightmares? Start with Medusa, the snake-haired Gorgon. A woman so terrifying. One glance turns a man to stone. But before she was a monster, she was a victim. Violated in Athena's temple, punished by the gods, turned into a weapon. Medusa wasn't just dangerous. She was rage incarnate. Female rage, specifically. In a world where women had little power, Medusa became the embodiment of forbidden vengeance. A symbol of punishment. Not for men, but for women who dared to resist. Then there's Typhon, the father of monsters, a swirling, chaotic being with 100 heads and a voice of thunder. He battled Zeus and nearly unseated Olympus. He represents more than just brute strength. He's chaos itself, nature untamed. The unpredictable world before civilization tried to carve it into order. Typhon had to be buried beneath a mountain, literally, Mount Etna. Not killed, just contained. Because chaos isn't something you destroy, it's something you suppress. A message echoed in every law, every wall, every god-ordained hierarchy. The Chimera, part lion, part goat, part serpent. Not a creature, but an abomination. A hybrid. Something that doesn't belong anywhere. And that's what made it monstrous. Hybridity was a threat, not just biologically, but morally. It blurred the lines between human and beast, between good and evil, between civilized and savage, and blurring lines in myth always means danger. These myths weren't isolated. They were warnings. If you step outside your role, you become the monster. If you challenge the natural order, you awaken chaos. If you seek revenge, you'll become a Gorgon. The monsters were not just characters, they were containers. They held the fears that polite society didn't want to face. They turned shame, desire, rage, and rebellion into creatures, and then gave those creatures a tragic ending. This wasn't unique to Greece. The Sumerians, one of the first civilizations, had their own beast, Humbaba. A forest guardian so terrifying, even the great hero Gilgamesh hesitated. But why was Humbaba a monster? Because he guarded a sacred forest humans weren't meant to enter. The message: nature has boundaries, and if you cross them, you'll meet something ancient and unforgiving. Monsters like Humbaba weren't evil. They were warnings in flesh. meant to keep human curiosity in check. Egyptian myth did something similar. Their monster deities like Ammit, part crocodile, lion, and hippo, judged souls after death. If your heart was heavy with sin, she devoured it. Not out of malice, out of balance. Ammit wasn't evil, she was necessary. A mythological consequence. A reminder that the universe doesn't forgive, it balances. And if you disrupt that balance, something hungry waits. What's fascinating is this. In early myths, monsters weren't always wrong. They were often right. They existed to maintain order, not disrupt it. It was humans, greedy, proud, curious, who broke the rules. And so mythology didn't just give us monsters, it gave us a reason to fear ourselves. Because deep down, the stories whispered, you could become one of them. All it takes is the wrong decision, the wrong desire, the wrong question. That's how control works. Not through chains, but through narratives. Myths made fear moral. They shaped behavior long before laws did. Because if people believed the monster was waiting, they'd never leave the path. And if they did? If they crossed the line? The monster was there to justify whatever happened next. Myths didn't just reflect fear, they enforced it, turned it into something sacred, and in doing so, made the monster useful. That utility of fear, that's what we'll explore next. Because philosophers noticed the same thing. Fear doesn't just protect, it shapes societies. In ancient times, the monster wasn't always the villain. Sometimes it was a guard. Not of treasure, but of balance. It stood at the edge of the world, or at the entrance of forbidden knowledge. And behind it? Something you weren't meant to find. Something sacred or dangerous, or both. Or, let's start in Mesopotamia. A cradle of civilization and one of the first places humans recorded fear in clay. They believed the world was surrounded by water, and that just beyond the walls of their cities lived chaos incarnate. Tiamat. Tiamat was a dragon-like goddess of the primordial ocean. She wasn't just a monster. She was the chaos before creation. When the gods killed her, they used her body to create the world. Her ribs became the sky. Her tears became rivers. What does that say? That civilization itself, order, law, structure, is quite literally built on the corpse of chaos, on her bones, on fear. And the message passed down for generations. If we stop maintaining order, Tiamat returns. She was never defeated, just held back by stories, by systems, by belief. In this way, monsters became the border between what is and what must not be. They didn't just frighten, they warned. Cross this line, you lose the world. That same theme appears in Hindu mythology, where cosmic balance isn't a metaphor, it's the whole point. Take the serpent Vasuki, who is coiled around Mount Mandara during the churning of the ocean. This wasn't a battle, it was a ritual. Gods and demons pulling opposite ends of Vasuki to stir the sea of milk, hoping to extract divine nectar, immortality. But Vasuki was no tool. He was a cosmic being, a force of balance. Without him, the churning would collapse. No creation, no gods, no nectar. Here the monster is sacred, not to be defeated, but respected, feared. Yes, but not out of hatred, out of awe. Hindu cosmology teems with beings who are monstrous in form, but divine in purpose. Demons that serve gods, destroyers who preserve harmony. Fear is not the opposite of holiness. Sometimes, it is holiness. This duality is unsettling, especially for modern minds raised on black and white morality. But in mythology, the monster often exists to tell you, you're not ready. This knowledge isn't yours. Go back. Now let's move to Mesoamerica, where the Aztecs and Maya saw monsters not as outsiders, but as guardians of transitions, from life to death, from earth to the divine. In the Maya underworld, Xibalba, the path to the afterlife was littered with trials and terrifying deities. Each test wasn't just dangerous, it was meaningful. The monsters weren't evil. They were filters, designed to measure your spirit. The Aztecs told of Quetzalcoatl, a massive crocodilian monster with endless mouths. It floated in the primordial sea, and the gods had to slay it to create the earth. Sound familiar? Another chaotic beast used to build the world. Another message passed down in blood and ritual. Creation is violent, and if we forget the cost, if we forget the fear, we risk unraveling everything. What's striking in all these myths is that the monsters weren't made to be defeated by mortals. They weren't bad guys. They were foundations, sacred terror, placed at the boundaries of human ambition. You want immortality? You meet Vasuki? You want knowledge? You meet Humbaba. You want to create a world? You must tear it from Quetzalcoatl's body. The deeper the desire, the deeper the fear. Mythology teaches that the most dangerous thing is a human who forgets to be afraid. And so, monsters became teachers, not in a loving, nurturing way, but in the way fire teaches when it burns. These stories weren't warnings from parents. They were rules from gods. And the gods didn't explain. They punished. That's the lesson early humans internalized, that if something feels forbidden, there's probably a monster guarding it. And maybe it's better not to knock. This was how morality began. Not from logic, but from fear. Before law codes, before ethics, we had myth. And myth said, you don't need to know why, just obey. Which brings us to philosophy. Because as civilizations matured, some began to ask, is fear really necessary? Or is it just convenient? Not all monsters have claws. Some wear robes, some wear smiles, and some live in the quiet chambers of your mind. We've seen how mythology externalized fear, but philosophy brought it home. It made the monster you. Let's start with Thomas Hobbes, a 17th century philosopher who believed fear was the foundation of civilization. His most famous work, Leviathan, opens with this idea. Without authority, humans will destroy each other. According to Hobbes, human life in a state of nature would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. No laws, no government, just fear. Everyone, a potential predator. Every neighbor, a possible threat. So what do? We create a Leviathan. Not the sea monster of myth, but a symbolic one. A sovereign, a government, a system so big, so powerful, so fearsome. It keeps all the other monsters in line. In Hobbes's view, fear is not the enemy. It's the glue. It binds people into a contract. You give up your freedom. In return, you get safety. But here's the twist. This sovereign, this Leviathan, must be feared. Because if it isn't, chaos returns. So fear becomes sacred, necessary, institutionalized. This was a philosophical shift. Instead of fearing monsters, you now feared collapse. And to prevent it, you obeyed. Philosophy at that point wasn't trying to free people. It was trying to explain why they needed to be controlled. Why fear might be the only thing keeping us from tearing each other apart. And yet, Hobbes wasn't wrong. He saw something true. That fear changes behavior faster than love ever could. That control is easiest when fear is constant, predictable, designed. A few centuries later, another thinker, Carl Jung, turned inward. He didn't ask why we fear the monster. He asked why we create it. Jung believed every human has a shadow self, a dark, hidden part of the psyche, filled with impulses, desires, and traits we've been taught to reject. We don't kill the shadow. We bury it. We disown it. We say, that's not me. But it is. And the longer we deny it, the stronger it becomes. This is where the monster returns, not from the outside, but from the cracks in our own mind. Mythology gave it a face. Jung gave it a mirror. He said the monsters we fear most are the ones that show us parts of ourselves we're not ready to accept. You don't hate Medusa because she's hideous. You hate her because she reminds you what vengeance looks like, when you're the one who caused the wound. Jung's monster wasn't just fear, it was projection. We project our shame, our envy, our violence, onto others, and call them evil. He wrote, "Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people." But most of us never do. It's easier to keep the monster out there, to hunt witches, not biases, to chase shadows, not truths. And when society joins in, when everyone's shadow is projected onto the same scapegoat, you get moral panic, you get public executions, you get monsters that look suspiciously like the people we already feared. This brings us to a core idea. Fear isn't random. It's curated, shaped, fed, because a fearful population is a manageable one. Hobbes gave us the Leviathan, a structure of fear. Jung gave us the shadow, a psychology of fear. Together they explain how monsters aren't ancient relics. They're current events. They're built into systems and baked into us. You fear what you're told is dangerous. You reject what you're told is wrong. And sometimes, you punish it. Even if it never harmed you. Even if it never existed. This dynamic is older than any government, older than myth. It's primal. But when wrapped in philosophy, it looks like wisdom. It looks justified, civilized. But deep down, it's the same ancient mechanism. Fear something. Name it. Condemn it. Control through it. In modern life, we like to think we've outgrown monsters, but we haven't. We've just gotten better at hiding them behind ideals. We don't say monster anymore. We say threat to national security. We say danger to our children. We say enemy of the people. We moralize our fear, package it, then sell it back to ourselves as virtue. And most people never question it, because the fear works. It's efficient. It organizes behavior, and it leaves the shadow untouched. Some monsters don't roar. They whisper. They wear lab coats. They build prisons, and they never break the rules, because they are the rules. If fear starts in myth and evolves through the self, its most chilling form is systemic. Not a single villain, but a quiet arrangement of policies, behaviors, and expectations that no one questions, because everyone obeys. Michel Foucault understood this. He studied power not as a thing that kings hold, but as a force that flows invisibly, through hospitals, schools, prisons, any place where people are observed, judged, corrected. His idea was simple, but unsettling. Control doesn't require chains. It just needs eyes. Not even real eyes. Just the possibility of being watched. He called this the panopticon, a circular prison design, where inmates can't tell when the guard is watching, so they act as if he always is. Eventually, they no longer need to be watched at all. They monitor themselves. They become their own enforcers. Fear turns inward. Obedience becomes instinct. That's where the monster lives now. Not in the dark woods, but in your own habits. Your silence. Your reluctance to speak, to question, to ask why the rules are the way they are. Foucault wasn't just talking about prisons. He was talking about society, because the same dynamic applies everywhere. Make people believe they're always being judged, and you won't need force. You'll have something better. Compliance. What fuels this compliance isn't logic. It's fear, but not the screaming kind. The soft kind. The kind that wears a uniform and says, "It's for your own good." You see it in how we moralize authority. The teacher knows best. The doctor always knows. The law is just... The church is sacred. The institution becomes the monster in disguise. Untouchable, unquestionable, and everywhere. Sometimes the fear isn't even about punishment. It's about exclusion, about being the one who doesn't belong, the one who raises their hand too late, asks the wrong question, laughs at the wrong time. Social psychology confirms what myth always knew. Humans are terrified of being cast out. Because in the deep brain, rejection still means death. The tribe keeps you safe. Being othered makes you vulnerable. And the monster is always what lives outside the tribe. That's how moral panic begins. A rumor, a fear, a sense that something is off. Then suddenly, there's a monster, a group, a belief, a behavior that must be stopped before it spreads. In the 1980s, America feared hidden cults. In the 1950s, it was communists. Before that, it was witches. Before that, heretics. Every era finds its monster, and every monster is conveniently shaped, like the thing society already didn't like. None of this works unless people believe the threat is real, and that's where fear becomes performance. People compete to be the most afraid, the most outraged, the most loyal to the cause of protection. This happens not in shadows, but in broad daylight, on the news, at work, at dinner, until fear becomes fashion and morality becomes mimicry. Stanley Milgram's obedience experiments in the 1960s revealed something uncomfortable. Most people will harm others if an authority figure tells them it's necessary, not because they're evil, because they don't want to rock the boat. The participants thought they were delivering real electric shocks to someone they couldn't see. They hesitated, but most continued, because the man in the lab coat said, "This is important. You must continue." No punishment, no threat, just perceived legitimacy, a system, a script. The experiment didn't show how far people will go under pressure. It showed how deep the need runs to be on the right side of authority. Even when authority is wrong, systems don't need monsters that look like beasts. They just need policies, procedures, cultural scripts so ingrained, we don't even see them. And if someone does see them, if they question, push back, they become the monster, the one disrupting harmony, the one making others uncomfortable, the one who must be corrected. That's how the cycle perpetuates itself. We don't fear monsters because they're dangerous. We fear becoming one. So we stay quiet. We nod along. We say the right things, even if they don't feel right. Control in this form is elegant. No chains, no fire, just suggestion, reinforced by stories, just like myth. Only now, the temple is an office building. The priest is a manager. The sacrifice is your silence. Power doesn't need to be visible to be effective. It just needs belief. And monsters, real or imagined, give people a reason to believe. Fear keeps the world spinning in predictable rhythms. Not because it's true, but because it works. There's a strange comfort in it, in knowing who the enemy is, even if the enemy keeps changing, even if the enemy was never really there. Because if the monster disappears, what excuse would we have for all the things we've done in its name? Not all monsters are ancient. Some are made in studios, some in basements, some in group chats, and some in your own mind while scrolling late at night. The modern monster doesn't crawl out of caves. It leaks out of headlines. It waits behind clickbait. It hides in fiction, but feeds on fact. Horror has always been storytelling's rawest mirror. It reflects what we fear and who we blame. But now, the mirror is everywhere. Movies, TikToks, Reddit threads, urban legends in high definition. Take Slender Man, for example, a faceless, suited figure with impossible limbs, who lures children into the woods. He wasn't born from folklore. He was born from Photoshop, from a contest, from the internet's hunger for eeriness. And yet, he became real. Not physically, but psychologically. Real enough for kids to believe. Real enough for violence to follow. Because belief doesn't need evidence, it needs repetition, emotion, community. Modern monsters aren't always invented to scare us. They're sometimes invented to distract us, to point our fear somewhere safe, to let it burn off in fiction, while real threats go unnoticed. We fear demons on screen, but not the ones hidden in plain sight. The ones who shape policies, control narratives, profit from division. Storytelling trains us who to fear. And over time, fear becomes habit. Monsters become archetypes, and archetypes become scripts. We follow without question. Think about how many horror villains are just reflections of taboo. The girl who had sex, the loner who reads too much, the boy who doesn't fight back. They all die first. These aren't random deaths. They're morality plays, teaching tools. A whisper behind every scream. Conform, or else. The monster doesn't just punish. It teaches, through violence, sure, but more often through silence, through what's left unspoken, what's reinforced in the gaps. Now zoom out. Think beyond fiction. What do we call people? Who live differently? Speak differently? Dress, worship, or love differently? We don't always call them monsters, but we treat them like they are, with suspicion, distance, judgment, fear of what they might do. It's the same instinct myth tapped into, the same that powered moral panic. Only now it's reinforced. By 100 articles, 1,000 posts, 1,000,000 silent glances, we are constantly being trained. Who belongs, who doesn't, who might snap, who should be watched. Even horror movies reinforce it. Who lives, who dies, who gets possessed, who was always evil. Media doesn't invent all fears, but it gives them form. It gives them music, lighting, a slow zoom into the eyes, until the archetype becomes familiar, expected, trusted. Psychologically, this feeds a powerful loop. The availability heuristic tells us what we see most often, we assume is most true. So the more often a type of person is shown as a threat, the more we subconsciously believe they are. It doesn't matter if we know it's fiction. The brain doesn't always distinguish between what's imagined and what's emotionally vivid, and the results are real. Policies shaped by fear, laws justified by stories, people punished because their archetype fit the script too well. What we forget is that these monsters are made for us. They're not random. They're market-tested, psychologically engineered, to hit just the right nerve. News segments don't show danger. They show patterns. They repeat them. They give the monster a face, one you've seen before, one you'll learn to flinch at. This is dark psychology at its most efficient. Make people afraid of the wrong things, and they'll ignore the real ones. Focus their attention on strangers in the dark, and they won't notice the ones in charge, the ones who benefit from fear, who thrive when you're too afraid to act. Even public campaigns use this logic. To discourage smoking, we created black lungs. To stop drinking and driving, we showed bodies. We made fear the messenger, because facts weren't enough. Fear bypasses logic. It hijacks the amygdala. It makes you freeze or fight or follow. And once a belief is formed in fear, it resists evidence. It clings to the myth. But not all monsters come from the top. Sometimes we invent them ourselves, to explain suffering, to make sense of tragedy, to avoid blaming randomness. It's easier to say, a monster did it, than to face the truth. Sometimes the world is just cruel, unfair, uncontrolled, and that might be the most terrifying idea of all. That there is no monster, just people, just systems, just the way things are. So we create the monster, because it gives the pain a shape. It gives our rage a target. It gives our fear a name. And once it has a name, we can destroy it, or at least try. The problem is, we never question who handed us that name, or why. Blame is a strange comfort. It wraps chaos in a name, gives pain a cause. It whispers, you're not the problem, something else is. And we listen, because we want it to be true. In ancient rituals, the village would choose a scapegoat, a literal goat, or person, onto which they'd project all their sins. Then they'd drive it out, into the desert, into the woods, out of sight, out of guilt. It didn't solve anything, but it made people feel clean, made them feel safe, and above all, made them feel right. We haven't outgrown this ritual. We just changed the target. Now the scapegoat might be a stranger, a group, a trend, a label. Psychologically, this is called projection. The traits you don't want to see in yourself get assigned to someone else. You call them manipulative when you're the one who's dishonest. You say they're unstable when you're afraid of your own emotions. Monsters thrive in projection. They give shape to all the parts of ourselves we'd rather not deal with. We say, it's them. And in that moment, we get to ignore the real work, the inner work. It's no accident that most monsters reflect taboos, things we're told not to talk about, not to explore. The seductive woman, the disobedient child, the wild, unknowable outsider. These monsters are made from shame, social shame, religious shame, personal shame, and when you fear what you can't control, you call it evil. Look closely at the language we use. We must purge this. We need to take a stand. They're trying to destroy everything good. It's never calm, it's never rational, it's always absolute. That's what fear does. It makes you certain. Certainty is addictive. It feels like safety, like clarity in a fog. And the monster? It gives you someone to stand against. In a world that often feels overwhelming, monsters give us purpose. They let us feel brave, like the hero in a story we've heard 100 times. The dragon's there. The sword is in your hand. And for a moment, everything makes sense. But what if the monster isn't real? What if it's just a mask? A container for emotions, beliefs, and biases that we've never questioned? That's when the story breaks. Because if the monster was made up, then what else have we been wrong about? Some refuse to face that question. So they double down. They dig deeper. They turn the scapegoat into a conspiracy. They give the monster layers, proof, connections, whole worldviews built on shadows. Fear loves complexity. When it keeps the truth away, it doesn't have to make sense. It just has to feel right. And if it feels like control, like moral superiority, like justice, then it becomes self-reinforcing. Anyone who questions it must be blind or evil or part of the problem. That's the danger of fear-based stories. They resist correction, not because they're strong, but because they're fragile. Beneath the monster is often something unbearably human, a need for safety, a fear of change, a wound that never healed. And instead of facing that pain, we dress it up, we give it fangs, we build it a name, we blame it for everything. But here's what mythology, psychology, and philosophy all agree on. You can't kill a monster by fighting it blindly. You have to understand it, to name what it really is, to hold up a mirror. Some monsters vanish when you do that. Others transform. Because not every monster was meant to be destroyed. Some were meant to be listened to be learned from. In some stories, the hero confronts the beast and finds out it's been guarding something sacred, a secret, a truth, a part of themselves they left behind. And maybe that's the hardest truth of all. The monster isn't always the enemy. Sometimes it's a map, a messy, terrifying, beautiful invitation to look inward and ask, what have I been running from? The monster never really dies. It just changes form. What once hid under the bed now lives in algorithms, in hashtags, in headlines. We pretend we're past myth, too rational, too modern, but we still tell stories. Only now, they come wrapped in notifications, in breaking news, in comment sections echoing with fear. The creatures of myth were easy to spot. Wings, horns, teeth. But today's monsters wear suits. They trend. They smile on TV. Or worse, they look exactly like us. We keep them alive with repetition. Each new fear gets an old face. The immigrant, the outsider, the childless woman, the man who doesn't belong. We say we're protecting values. What we're really doing is rehearsing a script. That's been passed down for centuries. The names change, the rhythm stays the same. Just like Medusa was weaponized against female rage. Modern monsters get used to silence voices we're not ready to hear. Think of the way headlines shape perception. Threats surge, cities in chaos. Words chosen not to inform, but to stir, to prime the mind for panic, to prepare the stage for the monster's entrance. Social media accelerates the myth-making. A blurry video becomes proof. A rumor gains momentum. One post becomes thousands. And suddenly, fiction becomes folklore. Fear thrives on speed, on repetition. We don't stop to ask if the monster is real. We only ask how to fight it. In this environment, monsters are viral. They spread not by biting, but by being shared. And each time we engage, we give them more shape, more teeth, more power. What's worse, we often want them to be real. Because if there's a monster, there's a reason for the chaos. There's a target, a fix, a future where we win. It's easier to imagine being a monster hunter than to admit we're lost in the fog. And the modern fog is full of noise, conflicting facts, overloaded senses, endless distractions. In that haze, a monster offers clarity. It doesn't matter if the monster's fake. What matters is that we believe in it, more than we believe in each other. Movies, politics, culture, they all recycle the same monster tropes. The infected, the corrupt, the possessed. Characters defined not by their complexity, but by what they threaten. They become tools, not to explore truth, but to reinforce lines. Us versus them. Safe versus unsafe. Normal versus other. Once the monster is named, the rules are simple. Destroy it, contain it, erase it, no empathy required. That's the most dangerous part. Monsters erase nuance. They make cruelty feel like courage. In myth, slaying the beast meant saving the village. Now, it might mean canceling a voice, dismissing a perspective, demonizing a group. We don't just recycle monsters. We recycle rituals. Outrage, purging, relief. The catharsis is addictive. We feel safer afterward, even if nothing has changed, even if the fear returns tomorrow, in a different costume. Because deep down, we need the monster to come back. Otherwise, we'd have to sit with silence, with stillness, with the parts of ourselves we don't understand. So we summon the next one, and we pretend it's new, but it never is. Monsters don't need to be real to shape real behavior. They just need to be believed. And belief doesn't start in truth. It starts in emotion. Fear short-circuits thought. When a threat feels urgent, you don't investigate it. You react. This is what monsters exploit. They aren't ideas we examine. They're forces we obey. This is why fear is such a powerful tool. Not just for stories, but for politics. For shaping culture. For making people choose sides, without ever asking why. Throughout history, leaders have used monsters to justify control. Barbarians at the gate, witches in the village, enemies of the state. Each new danger reinforces the need for rules, for punishment, for obedience. Even if the threat is invisible, even if it's exaggerated, even if it was made up to begin with. It's easier to build consensus through panic than through dialogue. Fear doesn't ask questions. It demands protection. And in that demand, power finds permission. This is how morality becomes reactionary, not rooted in principle, but in fear of what might happen if we don't act fast enough. Public outrage becomes a performance, not about understanding, but about aligning, about showing the world that you're on the side of good. But when good is defined by what it hates, it becomes hollow, performative, anxious, dependent on the next monster to slay. That's why these cycles repeat. A scandal breaks, a name trends, a community turns. Not because they know what happened, but because it feels familiar. Familiar fear creates fast judgment, and fast judgment rarely leads to truth. Even well-meaning people get swept up, because the fear feels righteous, urgent, like something bad will happen if they don't say something, anything. In this environment, silence becomes guilt, and guilt becomes a stain. One the system is all too happy to scrub. With punishment, modern monsters are often built through collective anxiety, a feeling that things are falling apart, that someone must be blamed. So we reach for the familiar silhouettes, the old roles, the recycled fears. We don't say which anymore, but we still hunt. The morality built on fear needs constant reinforcement. That's why the news loops. That's why stories escalate. That's why monsters keep evolving, just enough to feel new. But the logic never changes. Something threatens us. It must be stopped, and anyone who hesitates is part of the threat. This leaves little room for empathy, for uncertainty, for the quiet truth that people are complicated, and that not every fear is a prophecy. A society obsessed with monsters doesn't learn how to think. It learns how to react. And that reaction is shaped, not by reason, but by repetition. Maybe the monsters never left, because we never really wanted them to. They explain too much, too easily. They simplify a world that refuses to be simple. When things go wrong, monsters offer relief. Not comfort, but clarity. Someone to blame. Something to point at. A shape in the dark. That makes the chaos feel manageable. Even today, in a world of science and algorithms, we find ourselves telling stories that follow the same ancient beats: good versus evil, purity versus corruption, us versus them. It's easier to fight a beast than to sit with what we don't understand. Easier to destroy than to reflect. So we keep summoning monsters, not because they're real, but because they're useful, because they help us avoid something harder: honesty. Honesty forces us to admit that fear isn't always justified, that sometimes the monster was never there, only a mirror, only us. And that's the fear we don't talk about. Not the unknown, but the known. The parts of ourselves we buried, the truths we edited out, the stories we told to feel good instead of true. We don't need monsters, but we do need meaning. And if we don't find meaning with care, we'll chase it with fear. You can stop fearing the monster without pretending it never existed. You can look at what it represented: rage, grief, shame, chaos, and say, "I see you now. You don't have to hide anymore." That's the beginning of integration. Not destruction, not denial, just understanding. We've spent centuries building myths about what happens when we confront fear. Dragons slain, demons exorcised, evils banished forever. But real transformation doesn't look like war. It looks like stillness. Sometimes the monster just needed to be heard, to be named, to be known. And when we do that, we stop needing enemies to feel alive. We stop defining ourselves by what we hate. There's a quiet kind of strength in this. A strength that doesn't scream, that doesn't punish, that simply says, "I choose curiosity over fear." The stories don't have to end, but we can change how they begin. Not with panic, not with dread, but with a question. What are we really afraid of? Because once we name it, we can finally put the sword down. We've followed the monster through myth, mind, and memory. We've watched it change shape, from serpent to scapegoat, from demon to distraction. But beneath every mask was something human. A fear we couldn't name. A truth we didn't want to hold. The monster was never just the thing in the dark. It was the excuse not to look closer, not to take responsibility, not to feel the discomfort of the unknown. But maybe we're ready now. Not to erase fear, but to walk beside it. To ask, what have you come to teach me? And what have I been avoiding by calling you the enemy? You don't need to keep fighting monsters. You just need to understand why you needed them in the first place. Because once you see them clearly, they stop chasing you. And sometimes, they even leave you alone. This has been Slowburn Mind. Thanks for listening. And remember, silence isn't emptiness. It's where truth waits.